10 seconds.
We don't have a quorum yet, do we? 1, 2. No, we do. We do now. All right, I'd like to call this meeting of the Hartford Charter Vision Commission meeting to order at 7 o'clock, and we will start with the roll call. David Grant, take it away.
Great. When I say your name, please just say here. Alexander Aponte. Arunan Aralumpalam.
Here.
Steve Bonafonte. Raul De Jesus.
Here.
John Gale. Vicky Gallen Clark. Kamora Harrington. Kenneth Kennedy.
Here.
Kathleen Kowalshin. Melvin Medina.
Here.
Yadira Rivera.
Here.
Bruce Rubenstein.
Here.
Eon Smith.
Here.
And James Wolfe.
Here.
You have a quorum, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, David. On to item number 2, approval of the minutes from April 22nd, 2021. I'll entertain a motion.
Motion for approval.
Second.
Okay, who moved? It's on the phone. Okay,
That was Alex who moved. Who did the second?
We had a motion from Commissioner Kennedy and a second from Commissioner Aponte.
Yes.
Any discussion?
I just wanted to make the commission aware that Commissioner Bonafonte, his name was spelled incorrectly. He did email me, and so I have fixed that.
Thank you, David. The record will note that. Any other comments?
Just look at the record to show that Vicky Gallen Clark is here.
So noted. Seeing no other comments on the minutes, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Abstentions? Motion passes unanimously. All right, on to the business of the evening. Attorney Mednick in the Corporation Counsel's office will be engaging in a redlining exercise tonight where they'll walk through the charter section by section, noting inconsistencies, irregularities, items of concern, things that need to be defined, so on and so forth. We have a really dense charter here in Hartford, so I will kick it over to Attorney Mednick to lead the discussion. Once he gets through the discussion, we will move on to item 4, Commissioner comments and questions, and we can discuss any outstanding issues from this conversation that Attorney Mednick is leading, and then any other items that folks want to discuss. So Attorney Mednick, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My pleasure to be here and to run through this exercise. And I'm very, very pleased that the Corporation Counsel, Howard Rifkin, old friend from law school and life, is here as well, and his comments will be very, very important to go through. We're going to try to move this pretty quickly because it's a deep document. We're going to see the document a lot in the next few months. But the objective of tonight is to take a look.
Steve,
yeah.
Steve, I'm sorry, Howard Rifkin here. Let me just introduce the Deputy Corporation Counsel.
Oh, I didn't see her on the screen. Okay.
Alexandra Lombardi, who's
There
joined.
she is. Okay.
Well.
I'm sorry. Yeah, the Deputy Corporation Counsel. She's been really helpful to me, and I appreciate it. Nice meeting you, Alexandra. We haven't met before, and I apologize, Howard. So we're just going to run through the document really quickly. The Corp Counsel has been really generous enough to provide us with their own commentary as well, and we'll start with the preamble. The preamble was drafted back in 2002. And I think that the comment from the Corporation Counsel seems to take notice of that fact. And so the preamble is, kind of an aspirational statement. And I think that I won't speak for the Corp Counsel, but I would speak for myself to say that a document written in 2002 probably needs a tune-up, and the statement of aspiration from 2002 certainly needs to be looked at. So that's the first part of it. Howard or Alexandra, if you have any further comment on that.
No, I don't think we developed any proposed language.
No, I'm
for you all to
Yeah.
consider, but I think we agree with Steve
Yeah.
that it needs to be fine-tuned.
So those of you interested in creative writing, that could be your committee, the preamble committee. It's something that we will take a look at as we're going through this. Chapter 1 is incorporation and boundaries. There's really not much we're going to do about that chapter, and there were no comments from the Corporation Counsel on that chapter. So that one we moved through pretty quickly. Chapter 2 are the powers of the city. I'll give a couple of my observations, and then I know that the Corp Counsel does have some comments in this section. The general grant of powers is a broad grant that's pretty consistent with the express grant of authorities that municipalities have in the state of Connecticut. My only questions come from immediate questions, section 3 and section 4, and maybe even section 6, that whether or not, and I think Corp Counsel does have some comments on some of these, whether these are necessary sections and whether they're utilized by the city. We have not broken it down to know whether it's a special act or not, but if it's different than a general statute, it might be a special act. And the big question would be, are these sections that we use in Hartford, or are they sections that can go away? So that's my only question, is whether we utilize the benefit assessments provision, the lien section, and eminent domain. We operate under state law. I don't think there's anything unique in the Hartford Charter on eminent domain. And I will defer to Howard and Alexandra if they want to talk about the comments in their memo.
Steve, did you share with the members of the commission the memo?
I believe so. David, did you send that out to everybody?
I did.
Yes.
Yes, it was done very well.
And what will happen with those comments, we don't have to go into each one of them. I have talked to the chair, and I'm putting together a comment grid that I'm hoping after our meeting with the mayor and whoever else at the next session, you will get a comment grid broken chapter by chapter that will show every comment that was made at the public hearing, issues that are raised tonight. I will be incorporating the Corp Counsel's comments into that document so that we could follow up and remember that they came, and then figure out how to prioritize from there. So if we can rely on the document, if the Corp Counsel wants to elaborate on any of them, we're happy to do that as well.
I would only comment that on section 3 benefits assessment, I've not, in the 5.5 years that Alex and I have been here, seen that provision used. It was provided in Ordinance section 32-49, but again, I've not seen it used. I don't know that it necessarily needs to be in the charter. I think the ordinance alone would be appropriate. But section 4 on liens, I think all of that's really covered. I don't know why it was put in the charter. And the section 5 has to do with the establishment of fines, and I think there's a conflation of civil penalties and criminal penalties in both the charter and in several places in ordinances. I think some more research has to be done about whether, in fact, under a charter, a criminal penalty of imprisonment can be imposed. That would have to be through, obviously, a court and prosecution by the state's attorney's office.
A lot of these provisions are old special act provisions, and most of the municipalities I represent don't try too much with them. And that's the real question, is whether there's any real necessity to keep them. And so we'll look at that one through the process. But I just wanted to raise those because they're either dealt with by general statute, or if they're not utilized, is it something you need to keep in the document? And that's the idea that we're trying to lay out there. Alexandra, do you have any comments on Chapter 2?
I don't know.
Okay. Chapter 3 is the election section. Again, I will defer to the Corp Counsel. This is the section, I know that we're talking about terms of office of elected officials. That's an issue I think Commissioner Kennedy brought up earlier in the meeting, and I know that the Corp Counsel had some comments. This is a section we will probably be looking at because it deals with the composition of the Common Council. So we'll probably be looking at the section a lot. Corp Counsel's raised some issues regarding registrars, special elections, and again, they brought up the question whether or not this section conflicts with statute. If it's been conferred as a special act and special law, do we want to test it and have the Common Council call an election when there's in fact Title IX really kind of occupies the field in the state of Connecticut? I assume that that's what they were getting at by including it in this section. And do you want to talk about the registrar voters, Howard, or it was raised in one of your memos?
Yeah, there was a more detailed memo that was provided by one of
Lori,
the assistant corporation counsel. I would suggest to the commission that you take a look at that and consider the statutory construct of registrars of voters.
all right, so those will be included in our grid as we go through it, and then in 2 or 3 meetings, the commission will work on trying to prioritize those provisions and those questions. In Chapter 4, the Court of Common Council, again, this goes through all the powers. I'm sorry.
I just want to note Section 6 C. There's a provision in the charter that says, if permitted by statute, the registrar shall be appointed by the City Council to serve an indefinite term. I don't know why that's in there, but
there was a movement in one of the earlier, I think I was counsel to one of the commissions where that was adopted. I would ask the same question, but I think that the intent of the people who placed that in there was to go to an era where there are no elected registrars, where there would be appointed registrars. I believe that that was their rationale.
right, it's controlled by statute, so
yeah, it's totally controlled by statute. So
you don't have to enable that in a charter. Anyway,
I'm not arguing. I'm pointing out
just
what the rationale
is. Technical.
Yeah, I think that's
as James said at the beginning, it's a very dense document.
But
you can undensify it a little bit, if that's a word.
De-densify. We'll do something. We'll delete it. We'll axe it. The same thing is with D. We don't need to have the effective date as a permanent section of the of that provision as well. The next section is the section on the Common Council. It sets their compensation, has restrictions on holding office. It lays out the powers of the council. One of the things that I want to talk about at some point is whether we wanted to have a definition section for this charter. It's something I've been doing in many of my municipal charters. And one of the terms that we would look at kind of comes into play in this chapter where we're starting to talk about votes. And there's different voting standards. In Section 2D, you'll see that appointments to commissions and department heads are by majority vote of the entire membership of the council. And so one of the things that we may look through, and maybe we talk to council leadership about this, and we have Commissioner Gale who's on the council, and Commissioner Kennedy, who served on the council, we might talk about the different standards for approval, whether it's majority of the entire body, a majority of those present and voting, but we would probably look through and see whether or not those standards need to be further harmonized within the document itself. The provisions in here, we'll look through the various powers that they have, many of which don't need to be specified, but they are, and determine whether or not there's anything that should be changed here. There are additional powers. They have the power of termination in 3A, which is a very interesting untested power. And if we did the research back, we'd probably find it's a special act provision, although that's not absolutely clear. You know, we can't do recall in the state of Connecticut, but many years ago, when Alan Taylor was chairing this, we all determined that this is a provision that would have some shot at passing a muster with the Supreme Court, as just being a section that deals with the issue of the operations of the municipality and the integrity of the operation of the municipality. The power of investigation provision, I would assume, is a special act. I don't know if Howard or Alexandra have ever looked into this. With the subpoena authority, legislative bodies in Connecticut do not have subpoena authority, are not granted subpoena authority. The only time they are is if there's a special act. So we may want to look at this. We've never done a deep dive. My assumption has always been that the subpoena authority goes back to a special act. And then it deals with their organization, their meetings, procedures for passing ordinances. I know that they have a comment in section 2 of the document. And then they also, well, it's basically the procedure for adopting ordinances. And again, I guess when Commissioner Gale is here and Commissioner Kennedy is here as well, we can talk about some of these procedures to see whether they should be looked at. And I think the Corp Counsel had a comment on Chapter 4, Section 1, legislative power of holding restrictions on holding office.
Yeah, I mean, there's a term used in the charter restricting that a member of the council cannot hold an office of profit under the government of the U.S., state, or any subdivision thereof. It is a term American government.
Is Howard freezing?
Yes, I'm having a little trouble with his feed too.
I'm sorry. Alex, you can describe the problem if
Sure. And I think it's outlined in your memo too, Howard, but essentially we get questions about this from time to time. It's not a term of art that's defined anywhere in the charter. It's not a term of art that's used in our state government. And so the question comes up, and to your point, Attorney Mednick, about a definition section potentially being helpful, or just saying what we mean here. We've issued legal opinions on this, and so we've clarified where we can, but the question will continue to come up if not clarified.
So it's our local emoluments clause.
Well, I mean, can you hear me now?
Yep.
I mean, it's problematic because we've had to turn ourselves into pretzels, quite frankly, in interpreting what it means. I'll give you a most recent example. Josh Michtam is an assistant public defender. We believe that it was really intended to apply to people who had the ability to influence in some direct way the government of the city of Hartford, rather than merely being compensated from the state of Connecticut. So I think it has to be defined. I think the use of the phrase office of profit is arcane and really doesn't apply to American government. So we would urge you to fix that provision.
Thank you. They also refer to the subsection K in section 2. It's probably a section, I remember raising this, thinking of conflict at the time that we established the mayoral compensation provision a number of years ago to take the mayor's compensation out of the political fray, but left in the council section an ability to increase by ordinance the compensation of the mayor. And I was soundly rejected. They felt that if they wanted to increase it beyond what the automatic increases were, they would be permitted to do so. I think it's a little more problematic, so I would agree with the Corp Counsel. It's a section we probably need to look at, just for clarity. Did I capture your concerns?
Yes, and I think there are actually 3 provisions in the charter that apply to the compensation of the mayor.
All right.
And they all say a little slightly different things.
All right, so that's a really good catch. And as I said, the rest of the let's see, do they have anything else?
Can I just also turn your attention for a second to section 4C with respect to the town and city clerk? There was a provision in the current charter that was, I think, put in there for a previous city clerk, that the appointment would be made by the council, but for an indefinite term. Seems to us that appointments, whether it's by the council or by the mayor, should be coterminous with the terms of the respective individuals or body.
So coterminous with the appointing authority.
Exactly.
Section 7, I think you also had a comment, Howard, on ordinances.
Yeah. So there's an attempt to define what constitutes an ordinance or the subject of an ordinance, or when an ordinance when a matter has to be passed by ordinance. And I would urge the commission to take a look at that to determine whether or not that may need to be broadened. For example, if a proposed change affects rights, responsibility, or benefits of an individual, rather than just mere property, seems to me that should be the subject of an ordinance, and could not be done through a resolution. The charter does not say that. I think the definition of what should constitute an ordinance may be too narrow.
And again, in the definition section that I normally propose, there are multiple terms of legislative enactments that are defined. One is ordinance, obviously, which authority comes from the state legislation. There are resolutions, which are really statements of a legislative body. There are instruments called orders, which are kind of a temporary required action that a council may vote for. There's something I call statutory resolutions, and they are treated as ordinances because in many cases the state government asks a legislative body to, by resolution, take an action that looks more like an ordinance action, where you're creating a long-term relationship, or you're creating a department, and you have to do it through resolution. And because it's required by statute, I started in some of my municipalities defining another legislative vehicle as a statutory resolution. But I'll be happy to sit down with the Corporation Counsel and see what we can do to come up with clarity, because that's one of the things I usually try to do, to come up with clarity in what the legislative actions are, what they can be, so that there's no confusion as to what vehicle the mayor can veto, cannot veto, and what actions the legislative body can take.
The other thing that would speak to a definition section in the charter is, in this instance with an ordinance, the mayor has 7 days to act on an adopted ordinance and 2 days to act on any adopted changes the council makes in the budget. It does not define days as business days or calendar days. There are some ordinances that actually do speak to business days. I think it would make sense to define those terms.
That's one of the defined terms that will normally be in a definition section. I agree with the Corp Counsel completely on that. You had some concerns on the waiving of reading and.
Well, I mean, the way the charter reads is you're actually supposed to read the ordinance in full into the record. In the 5.5 years that Alexandra and I have been here, and she was in the corporate counsel's office before that for a period of time, I doubt that that was ever done. And it is not done.
I served on the Board of Alders for 10 years, and we had first and second readings. We've never read an item into the charter, and that goes into the record, and that goes back to the 80s, and I'm sure before then.
It's the, before the state legislature, the General Assembly, there's usually a motion to waive the reading.
Yep.
That's made. So there should be a change in some way. And then in the record and publication of ordinances and other matters, I think that some consideration about bringing all of this into the modern era would be worth a conversation.
Right. Alexandra, any comments? All right, thank you. Chapter 5 is the mayor. Again, this is another area where we established the compensation, which has been raised already, but this was the main reform of one of the charters, I think back in, it might have been the 2007 charter, I forget when this was put in, and or it's possible it was the 2002 charter where this was adopted. And this basically, again, goes through the powers of the mayor. There are, we might want to look through, particularly in light of COVID. I don't know if Howard and Alexandra had any experience with subsection P on public emergencies, whether there were any issues during the pandemic, which was the ultimate, the grandfather and grandmother of public emergencies, whether there was anything in here that was problematic in that respect. But emergency powers are sections of charters that I've dealt with quite a bit in a few municipalities to really try to establish a real mechanism so that there is as much accountability as there can be during an emergency within the contingencies of the disaster that we're dealing with. The pandemic was a very profound issue for the country, but with technology, most governments operated pretty well during the pandemic. There was not like a tornado or a flood where we had destruction of property and equipment. The governments were able to operate. We're still operating for the next few weeks this way. And so, but I was curious whether subsection P posed any problems during the pandemic for you.
Howard, you just muted yourself. I think you were going to say something.
Sorry. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say it didn't present any issues. This was a unique emergency in that it was, I mean, not only statewide, obviously, but countrywide and worldwide. But a lot of what the governor didn't put into effect prevailed over what we would take, any action that we would take on a local level. And so this provision obviously wasn't tested just with respect to a Hartford emergency, but to the extent that we used it or referred to it, I didn't have any issues.
The other question I have is in O, the mayor is the traffic authority as defined in the general statutes. And under the general statutes, I just went through this in another city, police, you don't have a police commission in Hartford. Is that the reason why this historically has been placed here? Because under statute, police commissions operate as traffic authorities.
I don't know the history. I can tell you that we have the provision in ordinance about the mayor's right to delegate authority. And so the mayor typically does that. And forgive me, I forget the position title in DPW that takes care of most traffic related items, but this hasn't presented an issue because the mayor can delegate that authority under our ordinance to the appropriate party.
Okay.
Right. And you're right, we do not have a police commission like New Haven has.
Okay. Again, those are the powers of the mayor.
They also just point out there's a provision about our own 25th Amendment, temporary absence or disability. And just to comment that has never been, there has never been an ordinance adopted setting out a procedure for determining what constitutes a temporary absence or disability.
One of the, and I'll point this out to the commission. I had been a big advocate of trying to move provisions out of charters and into ordinances. What I have found, I have a charter revision coming up. I'm not going to name the municipality. In 2 years, there are 3 major provisions that we grandfathered out of the charter 8 years ago, 7.5 years ago, and they were supposed to adopt ordinances to effectuate, to basically effectuate the transfer, and then the grandfathered provisions would go away from the charter. I have just notified them that please get these ordinances done before we start the new charter revision that has these grandfathered sections in it, because it's really important. So sometimes councils do not follow up, which I think is a good point that Howard's making here. And I think we can send a note over to the council to remind them. You'll see a few, you may see a few of them here in the Hartford Charter. I've peppered my charters with those provisions to make sure that you have current law and don't have to go through a charter revision to change the law where you establish a constitutional standard in your charter. But it is an occupational hazard. The next chapter is other elected officials. And this chapter deals with the treasurer. In a few weeks, I'll go through the pension provisions. We won't do that tonight. The Special Act pension provisions, there are a number of, the only things that may be saved from those sections are sections that will end up in the treasurer's section of the charter, but we'll talk about that in a few moments. You have a very unique treasurer's role in Hartford. In fact, I'm wondering why this is not called the city treasurer. There's a little section on registrar of voters. They could probably be moved into section, into chapter 2 or 3. It's a very unique position in Hartford. You do have elected treasurers. You have very few treasurers that have the fiduciary functions, the real true investment and fiduciary functions that the treasurer's office has had in Hartford. It makes the Hartford government very unique in having this third head with this much responsibility. Still has to be accountable to a pension commission and to the council, but is an independently elected public official. Again, that part's not unique. I think there's 17 or 19 elected treasurers in Connecticut, but this one's quite unique with the authority that they have. And there will be a number of discussions about this section with respect to the provisions of the charter that are going to be going, we're going to be recommending for repeal, the old Special Act sections dealing with the pensions. The next chapter is boards and commissions. I didn't think, Howard, I don't think you had any comments on chapter 6. Is there anything?
I did not dare make any comments.
Okay, I got it. All right, so this next section is boards and commissions. When we get to this section, I will, again, agree with Howard. There's transition provisions that need to be deleted. If we do new things, we'll be creating new transition provisions. At some point, somebody needs to go through the document and eliminate transitions after they have occurred. We should probably have a provision in here that allows for that. Maybe people are afraid to mess with the charter in that regard. I agree with Howard. I was going to focus on D. I'll jump to it first. I've just gone through some substantial revisions of a similar provision in 2 other charters that try to deal with the technologies that are available, but also try to deal in a more proactive way of getting out into the community to seek diversity of membership on boards and commissions, and puts a burden on the mayor, and in one of the communities on an elected city clerk to reach out and find ways to increase public participation in boards and commissions. But this section is designed to try to create some uniformity in the creation of boards and commissions. It actually has some boards and commissions that are required by the charter, and the judgment call that was made by the Charter Commission at that time was that these commissions were so substantial and important that they needed to remain in the charter. But we also had appointed boards and commissions that would be required by ordinance. Some of my charters actually delineate priority boards and commissions that should be created by ordinance. This one, it's just left the full discretion to the legislative body and the mayor to decide what boards and commissions should be created. And then, of course, we had the pension board created by special act that's in here. There's some inconsistencies. I won't get into them now. We'll talk about them at some later point. Some of them talk about terms of office. Others do not. I think that if you're going to establish a board or commission in the charter, you probably should have the terms of office established in the charter. They don't seem to be, there's no consistent standard here. And I think Howard had some comments as well in this section.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was queued up. So Section 2A, with respect to the Internal Audit Commission, one of the 3 commissioners is appointed upon the recommendation of 2 potential members by the 10 largest owners of taxable property. Quite frankly, I'm not sure that that has anything to do with the work of the Internal Audit Commission or the skill sets necessary for membership. So I think some consideration of changing that should be had. And then with respect to the tax abatement committee, the 3 members that are named are the treasurer of the Corporation Counsel and the Director of Finance. One suggestion would be to add or their designees.
Anything else?
There were some Section 2C, the effect of charter on department heads. I think that's part of a transition from the previous form of government to a strong mayor form of government that probably could be deleted.
What do you want to do with the Office of Corporation Counsel? You have any thoughts on that?
You could delete that. That would be...
Okay, just thought I'd ask.
There are a couple of other. I don't see my memo in front of me. I lost it. So.
Well, let me jump back. Howard jumped into Chapter 8. So in Chapter 8, we're dealing with the
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Oh, that's okay. You're the boss. We moved into Chapter 8, which is departments and department heads. And again, an attempt here to create some uniformity in the establishment of departments, the ability to merge departments. One of the things I recommend, I don't know if we'll go in this direction, be certainly worth a conversation. There's a lot of detail in this section. on certain departments, and it was scaled down 18 years ago, 20 years ago, with the initial conversion document when we created the strong mayor form of government. I think it's a section that's worth looking at in terms of deciding whether it can be pared down any further so that you can build your departments by ordinance, by budget, in a way that's more fluid. It doesn't mean you don't designate obligations to create certain departments, but it might allow for more flexibility going forward if you don't lock in titles. I do think, and this is no joke, I'm a former corporation counsel, but it's no bias either. I think the corp counsel has got to be one of the charter officers that's named the chief legal officer of the community, should be laid out clearly in the charter. Police and fire, sometimes people go and deal with it as a protective services or public safety and public protection. But I think we can take a look at this, and we may want to talk to members of the administration to see if they have thoughts about how these sections work for each of their departments, to see if there's ways to pare them down even further. I'm looking through it again, as I did in the last 2 or 3 weeks, prepping a little bit for this meeting. I can see the things we did to narrow down, but it may require some additional condensing of the section.
Yeah, subsection 4 on prohibited practices should be looked at. There may be some provisions that are fairly punitive that are not really enforceable. And Alex, do you want to say anything about the veterans preference provision in the charter?
Sure. So a number of questions have come up about application of the veterans preference points because of the fact that you only get it for promotional positions if your city service was interrupted. There's also some statutes on point when it comes to veterans preference points and promotional examinations that are worth reviewing when taking a look at this provision. And so that's why it was mentioned on the memo from our office to this commission.
Excellent. The next section, I'm sure, based on public testimony, is a section we will be looking at. I was curious, Assistant Corporation Counsel Lori Miserak raised a question here, I think she raised it, about reference to the Department of Education, indicating that there is no Department of Education. So I was wondering, what is the bureaucracy of the Board of Education called? What is it, if it's not a department of the city?
The Board of Education is, is the board, the governing body, and then Hartford Public Schools is the entity, if you're talking about the school system and not specifically the board members, though some people use those terms interchangeably. I think Lori's point was that there's no Department of Education as a city department, and so that causes confusion in the charter. To your earlier point, Attorney Mednick, about special acts that may be confusing the issue. Obviously, there were several special acts that dealt with Hartford and its educational system. I don't know if this reference has anything to do with that or is a relic from those times, but certainly that term isn't applicable today.
So they're not a city department?
They're not considered a city department, no.
By who?
Well, by the charter itself, if you look at the list of departments and those that are established by ordinance.
Can we just put that down as a matter for discussion among the charter?
Yeah.
I often found it confusing when I served. The Board of Ed obviously guarded their independence a great deal, but there's a lot of things in the state statutes to protect their funding. So it maybe just something to take a look at in the future.
Yeah, no. From my questioning, I think that's a good point. I think it's.
I mean, Ken's correct. I mean, most of their authority, power comes from state statute. It doesn't come from the provisions of the charter.
Yeah, but there's a lot of case law indicating that departments, that public schools, whatever you want to call it in Hartford, are departments of municipalities that have to follow the rules, have to follow even the budget rules, even though the legislative body doesn't have authority to modify their lines. If the legislative body determines that they should provide reports to the municipality, those have been upheld by the courts in the state of Connecticut. So Board of Education lawyers argue for a very broad mandate for their powers and authority, and they're respected by most general government side people, but they are in fact departments of municipalities. That's the only thing, and we'll work it out however the culture in Hartford works. That's the reason I raised that question, because I thought it was unusual to not consider them a department of the city. They have their own chapter.
It's probably more form over substance.
I think that's true. Yeah.
I mean, you know, everyone really thinks of it as a city department, and particularly the outside public. There may be, you know, people internally who don't think of it that way, but definitely the outside public thinks it is a functioning arm of the city of Hartford. So it's just, you know, it's a long discussion. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah. And I agree with them on the transition provisions. There may be new ones depending on what this commission does, but the ones that are in section 5 probably should go away. Chapter 10 is the budget. Again, I'm not aware of, and I see the Corp Counsel didn't have anything from this section, of any issues that are involved in the budget. Maybe we'll hear otherwise from members of the council or maybe from the mayor. But that's the budget. It's a pretty thin budget section when it comes to laying out procedures, but I think they're relatively clean in this section. The borrowing section, chapter 11. Normally, you know, sometimes in these processes, again, this is a pretty thin section of the charter. We may consult with bond counsel if an issue comes up, whether the $2 million threshold is a sufficient threshold, whether you need to up it, whether you need to change it in any other way. Those are the kinds of sections, kinds of issues that come up. We did clean this up a number of years ago. So all the in-person requirements, there were, even up to 20 years ago, there were requirements to have the city council meet at 12 o'clock noon on the day that you're going to sell a bond in the mayor's office to approve it. And a lot of those sections are gone from charters. And then chapter 12 is the beginning of the, it deals with the pension commission and pension provisions. This may be something that we could merge with the section where the treasurer is, since so much of it comes under the office of the treasurer. And there will be some recommendations from there. And then the last relevant chapter for today's discussion is the miscellaneous and transition provisions. We will need to go through these to see what applies, what does not apply, and what new provisions we're going to be creating as we complete this charter process. When you get to the next portion of it, from page 59 on, you're going to find that most of these deal with pensions and retirement, and I believe that we're going to, as a result of discussions I've been having with the treasurer's office, that most of these sections are going to be recommended for repeal. So the charter will be thinned down considerably. Howard or Alexandra, do you have anything else you want to add? Because that's pretty much my run through on your charter.
Nothing more from me. Thank you.
Or me, thanks.
Thank you to both of you, and we'll certainly be in touch in the next few months. Mr. Chairman, that's it for me. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them. If not, we're going to be seeing these sections again going forward.
Yes. Well, first of all, Howard and Alex, thank you very much for coming tonight and spending your night with us. We certainly appreciate it, and the time that you put into, you know, go through the charter and advise us on things that we may need to take a look at. And I'm sure we'll be speaking to you again soon. So again, thank you.
And before they go, can I, through the chair, can I have a few questions on the Corporation Counsel?
Sure. Commissioner DeJesus.
Thank you. So during my time on council, one of my biggest pet peeves was the disconnect that there was with the code and the charter. So there's a lot of language in our ordinances that do not speak to the charter. Mike, and I would like to see some way, somehow, that the charter speaks to the city looking into the code periodically too, to make sure that when we make a change in the charter, there's also a change in the code. Before I left, I know that the goal was to make corrections to the code. Has that corrections of certain titles and names, have that been modified or changed thus far?
Well, periodically, if language needs to be updated,
Howard, you're cutting out again.
it has been. I'm sorry. To fix that. I'll try again. Periodically, when we've updated provisions of the ordinances, we've made sure that it reflects the charter provisions underlying that. There has not been a comprehensive effort that I'm aware of to go through and do a full-blown ordinance reform or review. There are provisions in our ordinances which say, for example, where the term city manager appears,
yep.
Consider that to be chief, either mayor or chief operating officer. So there are general provisions like that. We don't have like a revision, an ordinance revision commission, like there used to be a statutory revisions commission at the state level. To look at our ordinances and the language and to update it and make sure that the ordinance provisions are consistent with the charter. That may be something that's worth considering in the future, but we haven't done it in a systemic way.
Steve?
Yeah, thank you, Howard. Back in the mid-aughts, your predecessor, John Rose, hired myself, and there was a team of lawyers, and Ken Kaufman, I can't remember the others, after the 2002 charter was adopted, to do a comprehensive ordinance revision. That was a beer of a project. It then conflicted with the end of the Perez administration, and it was discontinued. But the process started, but it's a massive process to go through every ordinance and decide how to contour to the newer form of government, which is now 20 years old, 18 years old. But it was attempted in the mid-aughts, just before the transition from Mayor Perez to Mayor Segarra.
Yeah, and I think you will
unsuccessfully.
You would find that Alexandra and I were too cheap to hire a bevy of lawyers to do that at this point.
Can't afford.
Jesus, any other questions?
No, I think it would just be great help for the public as they sometimes show up in public hearings citing information that is inaccurate, and also for the legislative body. Most of them will do a lot of work reading the code and do work that it turns out the Corporation Counsel said no longer applies. So I think it's just be good for clarity. After 20 years, we still haven't addressed it. I think it'll be a good time to bring that up some way, somehow in the charter conversation.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner. Any other questions or comments for Howard and Alex before we let them go? All right. Thank you both. Appreciate it.
Sure. Anytime. Y'all take care. Good luck.
Thank you.
All right. On to item number 4, Commissioner comments and questions. I just want to let everyone know at our June 17th meeting, we'll hear from city officials about the changes they'd like to make to the charter. And we'll have the mayor members of council, treasurer's office, Board of Ed, and potentially some other members of commissions. We're going to start putting that together shortly. And then at our July 1st meeting, members of the commission will have the opportunity to share their own opinions on changes they'd like to make to the document now that we've heard from, by that time we'll have heard from a number of different experts and stakeholders on what we should be taking up. And following one or two meetings, depending upon how much the commission wants to take a look at, we'll start prioritizing and chopping things up. Is that right, Steve?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And then with regards to holding in-person meetings, the Hartford City Council will be resuming in-person meetings following the lapse of the Governor's Executive Order 12B on July 20th. And given the size of our commission and the fact that neither council chambers or the function room are very big, I think it's best to follow council's lead to ensure that we have the right technology infrastructure for remote participation and that we create the safest environment possible for the community to go back to when we do go back in person. So that's where things stand now, subject to change. And if any commissioners have any questions about that, happy to have a conversation about that and reconsider as we move forward. I'd also like to remind commissioners and the folks watching at home to sign up for updates from the commission on meetinginfo.org. So whenever there's a new agenda posted or some supplemental document released, it'll be posted there, and you can opt in to receive automatic email updates at any time if that's something that you're interested in. Right now, we've got the meeting schedule for the rest of the year for the commission. We've got the current city charter, a copy of the pre-2002 charter, which was the weak mayor form of government. Then we have meeting minutes and other documents from previous charter revision commissions that I think will be helpful for folks to take a look at, especially commission members. And then finally, Commissioner Gallon Clark and I are working on putting together a one-pager on the charter revision process, and Attorney Mednick helped us out with putting together a draft of that, which was great. And so the goal there is once we, put the content together, we'll circulate to the rest of the commission for comments and then hopefully get it out to the NRZs and other stakeholders so that folks can have something to look at that really explains what this process is in detail and get more engagement from the community at large. So looking forward to getting that out as soon as possible. And thank you, Commissioner Gallon Clark, for stepping up and helping with that. Any other comments or questions?
I do have a comment.
Sure.
And Attorney Mednick, I'm not sure if this is for you or if it was for the Corporation Counsel, if there's any way that when they make comments or you make a comment and you have it right under the sections of the charter, is there any way that you can just highlight it so that we can readily make a distinction that these are comments as opposed to being the same color? I'm just thinking just from an editing or a reviewing process, it might make it more efficient.
Thank you. That's a great question. Earlier in the discussion, I pointed out that I'm going to be preparing a comment grid for you, and it's going to go chapter by chapter. And so you will be able to look at each chapter and see what people have talked about, including after your July 1st meeting. I've got a potential conflict I've got to work out with one of my city councils, but and so you'll see that very clearly. What we're going to see is you're probably not going to see revisions of the document, the full document, the 59 or 60 pages that we're going to be working on. Early on, you're going to be getting action item documents from me or background item documents from me, and the changes will come in red line form or color form or something like that. But you're going to have a comment grid that I will try to keep up to date throughout this process. And if we start getting public mail, I'm assuming David will be sending it out to all of us. And when those come in, I add those to the comment grid, whether it's come in through public hearing or through our website. If it's distributed officially, it will be in your comment grid, Commissioner. So you'll see that. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other questions or comments? Commissioner Kennedy.
Oh, no.
Okay. All
I
right.
have a question.
Commissioner Rubenstein, go ahead.
Yes, with respect to Howard and Alexandra's comments of numerous items, some large, some small, that need to be looked at on the grid, Attorney Mednick, will there be reference of these items and the particular article and sections that they pertain to?
Absolutely, and each item will be endnoted. I could footnote them. I prefer endnotes, but if the commission wants footnotes, I'll do footnotes. You'll be able to see who the comment is connected to. So you'll see that the Corporation Counsel's office brought this up, that somebody who testified at a public meeting 2 weeks ago, public hearing, brought that up, and it has the date that it came in, who brought it up, how many people brought it up. So it'll be very clear. And Howard's memos were terrific because he was very particular in both memos about listing the sections. So they will be listed under the chapter by section. And identify.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Party. Yeah.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Commissioner. Anything else? All right.
More of a comment through the chair.
Sure.
I guess I know a few commissioners had questions about what Attorney Rafkin was referencing to about the how to slim down the verbiage on the charter. So he cited the chapter 10, which is a budget provision, and if needed, I will probably send it to other people if they want to see an example of what it can be done. When I was on council, the budget and the way it was described in the charter was very vague. And so it gave the executive branch a broad authority as to what it defined. Right before I left, the last ordinance that I left behind, we did it through ordinance as to specifying the exact details and how legislative bodies should receive the budget. So I think it's a good example for those who may not understand that a lot of the wording does not have to be in the charter, but it can be done through legislation. So I'll get you the ordinance of how removing some verbiage from the charter can be helpful, and then the legislative body can define it through ordinance. And I think that's a good chapter there because there's a significant amount of details in that ordinance that it'll probably take up another 20 pages out of this charter. So I think it allows a freedom for the legislative body to tweak it as needed. So I think that's a good chapter to use as an example, as I think what it should look like.
Great. If you want to send that to David Grant, he can send it around to everyone else and we'll make a note of that.
Will do.
Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, without objection, we will stand adjourned at 8:03. Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you.
You
Thank
too.
you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.